timekeeping is very strict, I noticed, but I'm happy about that. I was told not to move around too much, so forgive me if I will just move here on this perimeter. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, which is a real pleasure in every respect. And I will just answer one question that I've been asked about my double affiliation. So I was at King's for 10 years, and I'm still at King's, but I relocated after the Brexit referendum, and so my primary affiliation is Vienna now. So far about my own location, I'm going to talk about some of the societal aspects related to personalized and precision medicine. I will say a few things about terminology, not in the sense that I'm going to suggest how everyone should use the notion of precision medicine and personalized medicine, but just to sketch some of the developments as I see them that moved from the use of the concept of personalization towards precision and what that signifies. I'm going to talk about some of the new connections that this iteration of personalization in the guise of precision medicine makes us or helps us to see. I will also talk about some of the divisions, and then I'm going to go into the some of the challenges that this raises and suggest some ways to address them. So we already heard this morning that, and I hear this a lot especially when I speak to clinicians. So my first sort of direct encounter with the concept, my first intense encounter with the concept of personalized medicine was when the European Science Foundation asked us to lead a forward look on personalized medicine for the European citizen in 2010. And we spent a lot of time talking about just what the idea of personalization meant. And a lot of the clinicians in the room found the very discussion quite insulting. They said, medicine has always been personalized. We've always taken into consideration individual characteristics of patients. And of course, this wonderful book by John Berger about an English country doctor is a book about personalized medicine. I mean, he tailors he tailors the service that he provides to the individual characteristics of his patients. But what we use as evidence for this stratification, that has changed. And we already heard this morning that one of the major events, however you look at it, is the Human Genome Project. And in the aftermath of the Human Genome Project, a lot of people, and this is the paradigmatic book by Adam Hedgecoe, understood personalization as meaning mostly matching drug treatments to genetic markers of groups of people. And as we also heard, this was one of the critiques, one of the point of critique was that this was group medicine, it wasn't personalization. And then the next sort of milestone in the story is that at the same time as in Europe, we did the forward look on personalized medicine, our colleagues at the Institute of Medicine at the National Academy of Sciences in the US did their precision medicine report. And of course, the Obama administration launched the Precision Medicine Project. And since then, lots of precision medicine initiatives all over the world were launched in China and in other places. So what is precision medicine? I use this as an actor's term. I don't mean to suggest that medicine can be or should be or is precise, and I'm bracketing off the question of who this precision benefits for the moment. I'm talking about the vision. And the paradigmatic slide here, the paradigmatic vision is from the report of the Institute of Medicine, this slide that Eric Topol and others popularized. It is interestingly called the Google Map of Health. It's a layover map that Google didn't invent. The fact that in this report it's called a Google Map is quite telling, I think. But the idea is that you integrate stable and dynamic parts of information, like a Google Map, like a layover map, into a map that is open to navigation. So open to navigation is the key point here. it's the temporal dimension here is incredibly important. You are supposed to create a map that enables people to predict problems. This is very much what you talked about this morning. To intercept, I will talk about interception later on, to intercept and to realize problems, to treat them before they create symptoms. And the other sort of shift from personalized medicine as a concept in the late 1990s, early 2000s to now is that personalized medicine in the earlier version was really a molecular, genetic kind of stratification, whereas precision medicine now is very much about data. It's about all types of data. This is a slide which it's too small for you to read, supposedly, but the idea is a vision from 2014 to really bring together social media postings, fitness club memberships, police records, lab tests, everything to really personalize healthcare. So overall, every type of information and data that you can get is potentially useful for the personalization of healthcare. Why is this significant? It's significant because we can no longer talk about health data and non-health data. We can make health-relevant inferences from the most innocuous, non-health related information. And of course, this indicates also that the legal and ethical instruments that we're using that still separate between sensitive and non-sensitive information, between health and non-health information, is no longer fit for purpose in this sense. So what does precision medicine do? These are 3 promises that precision medicine makes. First of all, and we heard this morning also, a move towards systemic and multi-omic approaches. Then it promises to close the actionability gap. Lee already had on his slide Nick Schwark's in precision medicine slide, so here you see it again. So we know that it works in 6 out of 10 people. Does it work in this specific patient? This is what precision medicine promises to close. And very importantly, the shift from symptomatic and episodic medicine to continuous and pre-symptomatic medicine. And I will argue that this makes us see some new connections. And I will talk about each of those in turn. I will not talk a lot about this because we heard about this morning. So it's very much a systemic way of understanding medicine. It bridges some of the fragmentation into organs, into kind of disease areas as traditionally described. One of the key arguments of the National Academy of Sciences report was we want to replace symptom-based disease taxonomies with data-rich characterizations of people, not only of patients, of people in every stage of health and disease, and in a way that meets the requirements of the clinic and of research. And this is really bringing together, bridging some fragmented, previously fragmented ways of expertise and systemic thinking. Other instantiations of that are, of course, new drugs that have now been approved by the FDA that are not site-specific anymore. So what these drugs have in common is a particular molecular characterization, no longer a specific site. So this is all. These are all instances that show how expertise is going across previous divisions. Also, and this is something that is intuitive and not at the same time. So Donna Dickinson has written a very important book about me medicine and we medicine, where you rightly point out that a lot of the discourse around personalized medicine was very much about the individual. And you raised the concern that the collective could get lost. When we look at the epistemic and methodological tools of precision medicine, we see a lot of connections between individuals and populations. This is just one slide that also signifies what we already heard earlier this morning, a kind of hypothesis-free approach. Colleagues in Vienna who just looked at the entire hospitalized population of Austria and without having a hypothesis, looked at all kinds of associations and then found that statins could offset some of the insulin-related risks of cancer risks. So, but you don't, individual information doesn't mean anything without the population, without the reference population. And of course, the million-euro question is, how is the reference population defined? And that also becomes much more granular. The reference, the comparators become more dynamic, and they're defined in different ways. We're not using the old classical, traditional epidemiological and demographic characteristics, but we're using much more versatile ways of describing reference populations and defining them. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is, I mean, we have talked about the need to also look at social determinants and the need, this was Joseph's talk, to look at, and other colleagues have spoken about this, to look at other personal characteristics that are not only the biophysical information, but again, counterintuitively, maybe precision medicine as an approach that uses whatever works, as Lee said this morning, could actually promote and catalyze a shift towards value-based healthcare. So this is, again, it's not intuitive, because value-based healthcare, if we understand this as something that really promotes and increases the value as experienced by patients, not exclusively, but prominently, that seems to be in attention, or it's assumed to be in attention with a kind of precision medicine that is sort of focused on data and hard and quantifiable and so on. But if, and this is a shift that has happened in the United States and in other countries, if we really move towards also models of financing that move from volume to value as experienced by patients, that could be an opportunity actually to bring in the person-centered factors as well. Because if some low-cost, high-touch intervention works, if it brings the outcome, if people get reimbursed by good outcomes, then that is going to be used, right? So if it's no longer the high volume, but really high value, then that could be somewhere where actually precision medicine creates synergies with the shift towards value-based healthcare. So in all of my positive examples, there was one thing that took the center stage, which is data. And I think, and this is my hypothesis and my message really for the remainder of my talk, we are not talking enough about what data actually are, and ontologically, and how we're going to govern them in a good way. We talk a lot about data protection, but it's a little bit like Mariana Mazzucato says about value in economics. We know how to measure value, we don't talk about what it is. And the same goes for healthcare. We know how to measure value, we don't know what it is. And data are really crucial in that endeavor. So Henrik Vogt and colleagues, Henrik Vogt is an MD historian in Norway. They published this very insightful, I think, paper where they said, yes, it's holistic. Precision medicine is holistic in that it's all-encompassing. It includes everything, as much data as we can about behavioral, about biophysical, about environmental aspects. But it is still techno-scientific. It still tries to capture the person as a quantifiable and controllable entity. And these colleagues would say to Lee's vision, yes, it's systemic, but it's not a kind of organismic systems medicine. It's taking the body apart, translating it into data, and then putting it together again. So the agency of the systemic is not part of this vision, and this is what we need to bring in. And in this spirit, really, we do see with this shift towards precision medicine, we do see some new divisions. We all know that clinical trials had lots of people, lots of groups of people or underrepresented. And there is a bit of a rhetoric here around data-driven precision medicine, that this won't happen to us in precision medicine because we just measure everything and then we do what works. But of course we have a super filter bubble problem in precision medicine. The reference population is everyone who's insured with a particular insurer. And if most people are wealthy, then that's the reference population. This is the total. If we compare everyone who uses a particular health tool, then our total population is who uses this health tool. So we have a massive problem of missing bodies. In societies and in between societies, we have a massive global justice filter bubble, and we have one within societies. And I think we should be attentive to that. And one of the problems is when it comes to data and the role of data is that many analyses assume that digital medicine means doing what we used to do offline, online. But that's not what it is. Of course, we're doing some things online that we used to do offline, but the STS affiliated colleagues here will, of course, and the sociologists will know that digitization and datafication is performative. It creates new practices of individuals and of institutions. So it's true that some of the things that we've always done, caring for patients, running and eating, we now do, but we datafy it. But this datafication, and this is now a quote from my book, this datafication of life understood as capturing in data things that weren't captured before. Sorden calls it the loss of structural privacy. So the loss of privacy that just comes from the fact that lives and aspects of our bodies and lives are now captured. That creates new practices. So this is a person who says, well, I'm using this fuel band, and at the end of the day, when I haven't done enough, I go for a walk. And in her not in her latest, but in her previous book, Shoshana Zuboff actually warned us not to conflate automation with information. So this is a very technical quote. What she said in a nutshell is, automation is when we put things that humans used to do when we give it to a machine. But this process creates an information surplus that becomes an asset in itself. And that really reconfigures our society. An example, Amazon used to be a bookseller. So they just automated book selling. Then, on the basis of all the information of why people buy books, when do they buy them, what else do they like to read, the information surplus became a new business model. And that we see in healthcare now. We see, so the big global players in healthcare are not the pharmaceutical companies only, but it's the big tech companies. Amazon is now becoming a healthcare player, as you know. Why wouldn't they? They already know what you buy and what you shop and what you drink and so on. So, but this is important, that digitization and datafication are not merely moving to the digital domain, what we used to do offline, but it really creates new players and new practices. And I'll leave this out for the sake of time. This, I think, is an example of this kind of quantifying, datafying health and wellness, where some pharmaceutical companies are now talking about disease interception. And we also heard it this morning, the same idea, that we have to move the intervention into the future disease further and further back So before using mass spectrometry to make visible early compensatory mechanisms of the body that are not yet disease, we need to intervene early and early. And it makes sense for pharmaceutical companies. They want people to start drug treatments earlier. But this is not just another take on prevention. This is actually a life without health. So health is a fictitious endpoint that you can no longer realistically ever reach, because an interception, I mean, this is a word that we know from counterterrorism, right? We intercept the bomb, but it's already launched. So this is quite concerning, I think, when it comes to, when we think of what that means in terms of the responsibilities that people have in a society where they are expected to be responsible managers of their health and take the tests and take the preventive measures that they need to take in order to stay healthy. They cannot, in this concept, they necessarily fail. And we have, for this idea of continuous data capture over a person's life, starting more or less at the birth of a person. There is a word for that. It's called continuous medicine by some. It's also called something else by others. But the idea is that you create longitudinal data sets of as many patients as possible so that you can create a baseline of normal functioning for each person, and you can compare it with the data of others so that you are in a position where you can start to detect patterns. And you might not even know what an outlier means, and you might not know on an individual level what a change of a certain biomarker means, but just by comparing it to the data of many other patients, you are able at some point to interpret it. You say, in all of those others, it does this. I mean, this is, of course, in genomics, it's nothing new. In genomics, we've been doing this for a long time, but this is now moving out of genomics into other realms of data use for precision. And so all of these developments that revolve around the heavy use of, the intense use of digital data, I mentioned it creates new practices at individual levels, and it also creates new practices at sort of corporate levels, and of course it creates new concentrations of power. It creates new, it moves new corporate actors into the domain of healthcare, so much so that more and more people are now talking about a new Leviathan. And the new Leviathan is not a particular healthcare company. And the new Leviathan is the data using mega company that is a quasi-monopolist. And I think the comparison with Hobbes' Leviathan is quite fitting, because of course Hobbes, when he developed his original idea about the Leviathan, he also had a large corporation in mind. I mean, he wrote also about the East India Company, which was one of the paradigmatic examples of mercantilism. And especially this combination between the state and large corporations here is something that, I mean, who said that history never repeats itself, but it rhymes? This is a rhyme. And I want to conclude with this. This really highlights something that we need to do more than, not more than anything else, but it's a very important endeavor in thinking about precision medicine, in thinking about justice, power, participation in the context of precision medicine. We really need better data governance. And what I mean by that is not data protection in the narrow sense of the word. Data protection is this, what you see here under one. Strengthening individual control. People have more control over their data, as the EU General Data Protection Framework presupposes. But this doesn't go far enough. These individual approaches individualize the relationship between the data subject and the data users. They have all kinds of negative consequences, byproducts. They have a lot of positive consequences as well that I won't go into, but we've written about this and others have written about this. You know, putting the responsibility on individuals for how their data are being used. So there are more and more people now who say we need, in addition to increasing individual control, we need more collective responsibility and control over data. We need more collective responsibility for how we datafy and we digitize and how we use data for precision medicine and outside. And it doesn't start with data governance. It's not about what happens to data once they're collected. It starts with what do we datafy in the first place? What do we use? What don't we use? And what happens if we move away from this focus on individual control over our health data is that we shift the focus of our debates. It's no longer about ownership and consent entirely, but it's also about collective responsibility, about accountability, and issues that really concern collective governance. Commons approaches fall under this. Why is ownership and consent not enough? These are just two quick examples. This woman here on the left, she was too poor to buy a car, so she could lease one, but she had to agree that she had a device installed on her engine that would stop the engine, that would enable the lender to stop the engine remotely when she was late with her mortgage payments. And she made headlines because the car was stopped when she wanted to bring her daughter to the hospital. To other people this happens as well, and it doesn't make headlines. Amgen gives discounts to people for drugs when they make their health information available. So these issues that have to do with power relations, distribution of power and resources, cannot be fixed with questions about ownership and consent. Those people agreed. They signed over their rights to ownership. You can't fix this problem with this kind of individualized thinking of a data user and a data subject. So coming to the end, what do we need to achieve better data governance in this era of precision medicine? So the first thing is we shouldn't accept that the key problem is consent and ownership. It's accountability. How do we decide who does what with our data? Who's not represented? Who's the missing population? Who are the missing bodies? Not accepting that data is the new oil, because of course the new oil metaphor is dangerous in that it suggests, you know, oil is something that nature gives us, and the companies that take it out of the ground, they own it because they've applied skill and effort. Data doesn't come out of the ground. Somebody has created it in the first place, and we need to make sure that people who own this, who have contributed to this, get something back. We need to foreground questions of value and benefit, and not only how do we measure value, but what is it? What is valuable in healthcare? We haven't even come close, even in this room, of thinking about what's valuable in healthcare. To what end are we doing those things? We need to think about better instruments for harm mitigation. As I said, we need to ask regularly whose data are missing, who do we not represent. And what we often do when we analyze data without asking the question of who's missing, then we just jumping not only to conclusions, but we're also jumping to exclusions. So we are constantly reiterating the exclusions that are reflected in our data sets. And clearly, we need to discuss practices and technologies of precision medicine in the larger context of a political economy and not as a technical problem alone. And I will leave this out. I will just conclude with Elinor Ostrom's suggestion, really. This was very insightful in 2009, before Richard Thaler got the Nobel Prize for his nudging stuff. She already said, You know, you have been talking about nudging analysts for a long time. You've been talking about targeting individual behavior change at the individual level, but maybe we should frame the problem differently. Maybe we should frame it about a collective responsibility to create institutions that bring the best out of people. And this would mean precision medicine also needs to think about social determinants, and it needs to think about the non-biophysical factors. And this is what I call the sort of humanistic understanding of holism in precision medicine. And with this I end, because I think I'm out of time now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara.